Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday. It is also January 19th. It's also 2022. So all those things together, I guess, combined to give you the date and more or less the time, since we start this thing at 9 o'clock. So we got a lot of work ahead of us today. Unfortunately, I have this information to pass along. No West Coast cookbook and speakeasy today. No batting cleanup for us from just, we're going to have to cover every piece of news that there is from around this country and around the world. And I don't know how we're going to do it. But we're going to do it with Greg Dworkin's help. And we're probably not going to rush it. And look, there's an internet and you should read the news is basically it. I don't know. There's no way we can cram in everything that Justice crams into his show in 1 hour, by the way, and still feel like we've taken a leisurely pace and wasted our time here. It's difficult to do both. So, okay, hope all is well, and back on track there shortly, but okay, so, well, at least we won't feel pressured to try and tell you 1/8 of what Justice has in store for you in the last closing seconds of the show. So that's nice. We'll have that off of our backs. And there is some good news locally. We always like to start with the local news. Everybody got to school on time this morning. That sounds like good news. And that means the school's open. Not enough snow left on the ground to close it for another day, though I'm sure that school officials were hoping for it. More snow inbound here, I think, tomorrow, but only, I think it looks like trace amounts. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to do anything to school, and we'll see how the school officials feel about things. But the good news is they really, I think, found their courage yesterday. School board met yesterday to consider, among other things, whether or not to listen to the governor's claim that he has issued a lawful executive order rescinding the statewide school mask mandates, despite the constitutional problems that have been raised with it. And widely discussed all over the place. Yesterday, we were able to tell you that Arlington and Fairfax counties, where Youngkin was clobbered in the gubernatorial contest, along with Richmond City, where he was likewise clobbered, have said no to this. And I'm sure, resting on the constitutional issues, decided that they would exercise their own local authority as delineated in the Constitution. But, I'm sure underlying it all secretly somewhere was a basic FU to the incoming governor for doing such a stupid thing at such a dangerous time. But I had some question about whether or not Loudoun County would follow suit, even though the vote results not quite as overwhelming in favor of McAuliffe and against Youngkin here in Loudoun County, but still overwhelming nonetheless. An 11-point loss, but with Youngkin having centered his campaign on rhetoric about Loudoun County, despite having lost it, I think he feels that it is important to his base that he deliver on threatening Loudoun County, and he's done that with a separate executive order that we discussed yesterday. He has basically concluded that there was illegal wrongdoing on the part of the school system here in Loudoun County, and he wants to get to the bottom of it by putting the people who did it in jail and instructing the Attorney General to go ahead and open just one of those fair and balanced investigations that comes to that conclusion, and then let me know when we're going to put these guys in jail. So with that looming over their heads, I had questions about whether or not they would be as aggressive in, I guess, defying the orders, defying the purported executive order, as our neighbors in Fairfax and Arlington. And the answer is that they came to the same conclusion. Whether they did so aggressively or not, we have yet to find out. I haven't seen any reports that said that there was any particular aggression behind it. But I think that the conclusion was the same, that the constitutional power rests with the local school board and not with the governor. So that was good news. It was nice to see that announced, and that means that there's not only the mask mandate in place for my kids, or at least my one remaining public school or secondary school student in the local public schools, but the same goes for my my oldest, who's in a state school for college. And they face a similar problem. I guess the mandate covers them as well. And the president of their institution pondering how he will respond to this. Hopefully on the side of science and against the side of weirdo Trumpists in vests. So fingers crossed for that. And it means that the word comes down that next week they'll be in masks as well. And I guess they'll stay in masks as long as it takes for the Youngkin administration to get around to suing or trying to enforce their order, and however long it takes to appeal all of the cases around it. And of course, in the meantime, he's apparently searching around for ways to withhold funds and otherwise punish counties that defy his order. And that's basically, by the way, I mean, I'll just throw this out there. We'll see how far he'll take it. Being a term-limited governor, I don't know if he really cares so much about the re-election effort, but of course already people are saying, well, he's going to be looking towards the presidency at some point, which I guess is entirely possible. But at any rate, while we're waiting to find out whether he really thinks he's got a national base, we'll be in court about it, I'm sure, and almost the entire population center of Virginia is these Northern Virginia Washington, D.C. suburbs where he lost decisively and where they are refusing to go along with the mask mandate. Also, I understand, lawsuit filed by a group of parents in more southerly Chesapeake, Virginia. That's way down at the bottom of the state, but the southeastern corner, not the southwestern corner, which is entirely Trumpy, or at least, as anything goes, right? There were certainly people there who feel like islands of blue in a sea of red, and they are. We shouldn't acknowledge them. But in the southeast, down in the Virginia Beach area, some considerable resistance to this as well. So we'll see how it plays out over the next couple of days. We can talk about the science of it, though, as part of the report. Good morning, Greg. You're here. And
we are.
Why don't we acknowledge that and go forward with it as though there were a plan?
We can.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know a lot about Virginia, but certainly the like southeastern corner, triangle, which includes Norfolk, Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach. There's a lot of Democratic votes down there.
There are, yes.
It's not the southwestern part of the state, which right. is not so blue.
Yes, though we read a little bit about what's going on in the small towns there. Definitely some blue streaks there, but yeah, that's pretty red. The south, and the further south and west you go, the more intense that gets.
But still, a good reminder that no matter how red the state, there's always blue. And so one should never write off entire states because there's a lot of Democrats there and we don't abandon our own.
Yeah, well, it's not a thing you do when you're governing, right?
No, if you're governor and you're Republican, you abandon everybody.
Yes,
I mean, the
right.
funny thing about Youngkin is that he specifically ran on, I'm not Trumpy and I will unite, not divide, like right. Like all those other people. Mm. And, of course, the moment he gets into office, he does the opposite. So the question is, do people remember?
Mm. Well, and to what end? Because
I mean, they remember now, but are they going to remember when it matters? Not that it matters in the sense that you can't run again.
Right. Well, you run for something else.
There's other Republicans up for office, and you can say, remember Youngkin? Remember how he promised and lied about everything? Well, they all do it.
Yeah. Well, it's a good lesson. People don't absorb it a lot, but, you do what you can with it. All right. Well, anyway, he's a jerk, and my kids will wear masks.
Right. So speaking of jerks, and, I think we should talk a little bit about Boris Johnson. So we'll do a little international news here before we lead back to, more domestic stuff.
Yeah, we're doing it all today. Okay.
So the pundit roundup today leads off with, is Boris Johnson facing a no confidence vote? Now, I sent you a tweet with a little 37-second video. Is it possible for you to play that?
Well, we'll see. Yeah, let me see. You sent it. Is this it here and right underneath it? Where is? Oh, it's the Niall
Strange.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I will have to. Let me put it on like the big computer thingy here. So I will. Oh yeah, okay. I saw this.
It's worth playing.
Yeah, okay. Let me. Some engineering involved in it here. I can call it up on the big computer so we hear it nice and clear. Okay.
We're doing this because like it explains everything.
Yeah. All right. View the original. Yeah. It's going to take us a while to click on all these things, but it's nice. It's worth it. Some video clip. Here we go. Calling it up. All right. We got a little 5-year-old girl here. You want to set this up? Yeah.
Maybe 6.
Okay.
And she's being asked about what's going on, and she explains to the reporter at the Sun exactly what's going on.
Okay. Well, let's roll it.
Yeah.
Oh, Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
What?
Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. He told everybody to stay at home, yeah? But in lockdown, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he just went down to a party in lockdown.
Did he?
He's being naughty now. So we had to go to the naughty centre and tell everybody that he's sorry for going to a party in lockdown.
That does summarize it. The naughty centre, I'm not certain.
Well,
that must be a British thing. Oh, Parliament. Oh, okay, yeah. That's a good name for it. The naughty centre.
Right, something that Monty Python would do. So, and of course, children are brilliant.
Yeah,
as
got
always.
It.
And the thing I like about it is the way that she describes the Prime Minister's name. She probably thinks it's a single word, Boris Johnson.
Yeah, right. It's a long name,
But the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson,
right.
It's not Mr. Johnson, it's not Boris, it's Boris Johnson. That's one word. And but she captures everything, and so that's what's going on. And in fact, Sky News has today the threat to Boris Johnson's leadership is ramped up today. As more conservative MPs, that's members of parliament, said they have submitted letters of no confidence in the PM. That would be the prime minister, not the PM.
MPs didn't like the PM. That's right.
The MPs don't like the PM, but the conservative MPs don't like the PM.
Right.
Around 12 more letters were handed in this morning, according to Sky News political correspondents Sam Coates and Joe Pike. They were from members of parliament who were part of a group of about 20 first voted in at the 2019 general election, many in traditionally red wall Labour seats in the north. So in other words, the people that were swept in with the wave are worried that their constituents, which tend to lean toward Labour and Lib Dems, are going to throw them out. So that's why they're turning on Johnson, and that's bad because that's the politics. If that's the politics, that's really hard for him to reverse with an apology.
Yes, well,
because the constituents of those areas are not so keen on his apology because they feel the same way as that little girl.
Naughty center for you.
Yeah, so they want to send Johnson to the naughty center. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, remember... that Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, is currently in a plea bargain situation with his accusers, which is to say the courts. So ultimately, this stuff catches up to you. So take heart, those of you who are watching the January 6th committee or wondering about what Letitia James is up to. As it turns out, she is up to a lot. Big story in the New York Times this morning. New York Attorney General outlines pattern of possible fraud at Trump business.
What do you know? Possible fraud.
The Attorney General, well, he hasn't been convicted yet. It's alleged, right? It's alleged until then. The Attorney General, Letitia James, released new details of her investigation as she argued for the need to question Donald J. Trump and 2 of his children under oath. That would be Don Jr. and Ivanka, I suppose. And whereas there's some speculation that in the end Eric may wind up running the entire enterprise, I'm thinking the whole thing's going to land in Tiffany's lap until Barron's old enough.
Yeah, why wait? I say give it to Barron now.
We have uncovered, says the quote, significant evidence that suggests Donald J. Trump and the Trump Organization falsely and fraudulently valued multiple assets and misrepresented those values to financial institutions for economic benefit, Ms. James said in a statement. It's unusual for such specific and serious allegations to emerge in court papers, filed less than an hour before a midnight deadline to respond to Mr. Trump's effort to avoid being questioned instead of in a formal complaint. Mr. James' lawyer said, Ms. James' lawyer said that the release of the details would not hamper their investigation, and added the office was also looking into other conduct not discussed in the filing, which makes perfect sense. This stuff has been all over the papers. There's no way it would interfere with the investigation. Everybody knows Trump does this.
He says he does it. So.
He says he does it. He brags about it. He says you're stupid if you don't. And so the idea that somehow or other, oh, well, she said it publicly and that ruins everything, whereas he can say everything publicly and it doesn't matter because he said it, he's not hiding it, is just like the dumbest both sides reporting you can possibly imagine. The Times isn't doing it here, but you see plenty of it scattered around the internets.
Okay.
Now, this is
get around
parallel.
Ruining it.
This is a state investigation. Remember, no pardons here. Parallel to the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg.
Yes, new guy.
Who replaced Cy Vance Jr., which is examining some of the same conduct. Ms. James' office is participating in that separate investigation, which is continuing. Mr. Bragg, also a Democrat, inherited the inquiry from his predecessor after taking office on January 1st. But the difference, of course, is he's not nearly as corrupt as Cy Vance was, who took a lot of campaign money from everybody and then sort of looked the other way. But, that's alleged.
Allegedly, that's alleged too, sure. I'll allege that as well. It's true.
It's just one of those things that everybody knows.
Yeah.
Right. In Tuesday's filing, she went further, giving examples which she said the former president's business had misrepresented the worth of some of its properties and showing how these claims had benefited the company, allowing it to receive favorable loans, insurance coverage, and tax benefits. They include some golf places, believe it or not.
What? He has golf places? Well, they're probably corrupt.
Right. So, flipping back to overseas, the French... The French lawmakers ban unvaccinated from public venues with new virus law.
Oh,
Macron was famously saying, screw the people who are unvaccinated. I'm going to turn the screws on them, in fact.
Yeah.
And he was criticized for that, and he said, nope, I'm doing it. And apparently he's doing it.
Okay.
The National Assembly adopted the law by a vote of 215 to 58. Centrist President Emmanuel Macron had hoped to push the bill through faster, but it was slightly delayed by resistance from lawmakers both on the right and left and hundreds of proposed amendments. Now, more than 91% of French adults are already fully vaccinated.
Really?
And some question whether the vaccine pass will make much of a difference, but Macron's government is hoping the new pass will be enough to limit the number of patients filling up strained hospitals nationwide without resorting to a new lockdown.
That would be, I think, what everybody wants.
One cartoonist I saw, and I can't remember where I saw it, basically did the whole cycle. Biden proposes bold action on vaccines for businesses.
Yes.
Supreme Court blocks.
Right.
He's criticized for not doing enough, and so he goes ahead and he does something else bold, and then you just continue that cycle.
Right. Take him to court over it. Okay.
Right. So, I mean, the thing is that it's just an interesting situation where when you have normal people governing.
Yeah. Want to do the right thing.
Want to do the right thing and who don't always get it right and then try things and then eventually do things better. Are properly criticized for being slow to eventually getting to the right thing, especially when it was pretty clear that that's where you needed to go. And yet, the very fact that they're doing the right thing gets sort of pissed away in the idea that they didn't do the perfect thing immediately. Whereas the other side, who does nothing but kill people based on their policies.
Sure.
Well, we don't even talk about that because you don't expect anything from them.
Yeah. And they ask you not to talk
about it. The Biden administration right now, they're going to give away masks in the largest deployment of such equipment in U.S. history. I hear they're going to try to do it through the pharmacies and 95 respirators.
Okay.
Which we said you needed. Remember, those of you who listen to this show, you knew early on you needed to up your mask game. This is not news.
Right.
But it's news to a lot of Americans.
Everyone else ran out.
And by the way, as of last night, as of yesterday afternoon, you could go and register and have the federal government send you some free test kits.
I'm not giving them my name.
Well, I am.
Yeah, I did actually. So
you
should
I
do.
sent away for them.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? You could afford to have your own test. Well, it's true, and I do have one or two tests around the house.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. I get extra because just the same way as I've been getting extra N95 since the beginning of the pandemic. It's to give to my friends and neighbors who need them.
If you've done the procurement and
that's
they later have trouble,
my son came home to visit from California, He's an adult, and one of his adult friends all of a sudden didn't feel well.
Dope. Yeah.
Now, my son hadn't been in contact with him yet, but the point is the guy across the street didn't feel well, so, he just dropped one of those tests in the mailbox because they're neighbors, and that's what you do, and that's why we have extras.
Right, and I know you guys drop things in boxes all the time around that town.
Well, drop boxes, that's what they're for. So the idea that, maybe you shouldn't take them because people who need it, no, get them and hand them out.
Yeah, that's my thinking.
There's a number of reasons to do that. One is to show that there's demand. The other is to show that it works. The third is to have them for when you need them. Yeah. And the fourth is to have them when other people need them.
That's
so
right.
Get them, but don't hoard them. That's the message.
Yeah, and if you didn't get the extra, then you might be tempted to hoard them when your neighbor needs one and you say, geez, I've only got 6 of these things and I don't know how many of them I'm going to need and for how long. Well, if you have 8, then you feel like, okay, I can spare a couple here and order some and still have some on hand while I'm waiting for the 2-week delivery period. I don't know how long this Postal Service delivery one is going to take. I hope it comes through nicely and quickly because everybody was impressed with how easy it was to sign up to get them. You literally just
in other words, the website didn't crash the first time.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, even if it's a simple form, it could have crashed. Yeah, but it didn't. It held up.
There was one problem, which
great.
I think they have to fix.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah.
If you live in an apartment building,
right,
then it thinks that it's already been sent to that building.
Yes. Although I did see mixed
the thing to do is to put your address with the apartment number in the first line, not where it says apartment number, but in the first line. 37 Main Street, apartment 3, apartment number, leave that blank. And that way, 37 Main Street, apartment 3 is different than 37 Main Street, apartment 7. And so the website will think, we've never sent it to that address before, so we'll go ahead and send it.
Yeah, well, they didn't want everybody, they only wanted to send 4 per household and 1 request per household. So,
and a New York City apartment building is not 4 people.
Right. Okay. Well, I hope they get
There's more people in one of those Brooklyn apartment buildings than there are in the state of Rhode Island.
Yeah. They should have their own electoral votes. Or they should, you know what? Just forge your own electoral votes, for that matter. You might as well go ahead and do that. It's not against the law as far as I know. Right.
And it's really an exaggeration to say that about Rhode Island, but, probably not about Wyoming. Right. So, according to the White House site, the White House said in a statement on Wednesday that the government would begin shipping N95 masks to pharmacies and health centers at the end of the week, and that the masks were expected to be available by the end of next week. The program would be in full gear. It's interesting. So you send away to the mail to get your test, but you go to the pharmacy for your masks.
Maybe they don't want to overtax the mail system.
U.S. Postal Service, or maybe they're just trying different things to see what works better.
I don't know. Yeah, we'll see which one works. I'm a little nervous about it. Like, will Louis DeJoy steal my tests or not? But I guess we'll find out. The masks, well, my friendly neighborhood pharmacist, he'd never steal my masks.
Right. The masks will come from the Strategic National Stockpiles. I don't know if that means that they're covered in oil. The nation's emergency reserve, which was badly depleted at the outset of the pandemic, leaving healthcare workers without masks and other personal protective gear, PPE, personal protective equipment, essential to fighting the novel virus. Remember, pandemics are staff, stuff, and space.
Right.
Space is easiest, stuff is harder, and sometimes you run out of stuff. Staff is hardest of all, and that's the problem we're having right now. We've got plenty of stuff, and there's plenty of space. But
good news.
Even where there isn't plenty of space, you can manage space, but you can't manage staff. You can't just create that out of nowhere. An investigation by the New York Times published in March found that for years, the stockpile was heavily weighted toward protecting against bioterror attacks. Most of the past decade, nearly half its budget was spent on anthrax vaccine.
Oh, well, yeah.
We should spend less on anthrax vaccine and more on N95s. That's just my opinion. And you can criticize the government for that over the past decade. And the Biden administration is still doing the right things and needs to get credit for it. And although his polling is pretty lousy at the moment, I'm really not that worried about it because people still like him. They're just unhappy with how things are going. But if he does the right thing and things get better, and the latter is more important than the former, then, you get credit for it. It's really interesting.
Plus, we're good on
because what he's doing is he's announcing, I'm giving everybody this stuff.
Yeah.
And whether it works or not, he's clearly trying. So I expect his pandemic ratings to go up because cases are going down in the Northeast and Florida and Chicago.
Yes.
Going up elsewhere. The rest of the country is going to catch up to the hot spots, but they too will go down just the way the Boston poop meter is going down with the wastewater or mRNA, screening. So he's trying. And I'm old enough to remember Richard Nixon putting on wage and price controls, which were a terrible idea economically. But the point is, you show the country you care about inflation and you're doing something.
Yes.
Because strong and wrong is always better than, I don't know, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that.
Yeah. Plus he went on.
I'm not saying he should do wage and price controls, but the point is he needs to demonstrate he's aware of the problem and he cares about it and he's trying. It's a very different criticism to say you're doing the wrong thing than to say you're so out of touch you don't even know that this is a problem.
Yeah. Now here he might benefit from the Trump move when people are complaining about supply chain issues in their supermarket being low. He can go and throw paper towels to people and they'll be happy about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
although I would make it toilet paper.
Well, yes, right.
Particularly in Boston where they're doing poop meter scheduling.
Yeah.
I tried to find a chart of toilet paper sales so I could overlay that on the mRNA screening. I couldn't find it, unfortunately, because I think it would have, everybody wants to know. I mean, don't lie. You want to know.
I don't. I can't be sure about that.
You would look at a chart like that. You'd say, ooh, but you'd look at it.
Right, sure. All right, well, sure. I can get along with that. But that's like watching surgery on television.
Right. And then the last thing he's doing is he's put a delay on the 5G stuff so that the airports can get their act together. I don't fully understand this. I understand that 5G might interfere with some airport stuff. We can talk about that after the break. What I don't understand is everybody knew this was coming. Why didn't they do this sooner?
The calls didn't go through. That's why.
That could be.
Yeah, that must have been it. All right. Well, at any rate, something real apparently happening with 5G.
Proposals to study it were in the mail.
Lewis, I knew it. The Joy, this is your fault. All right. Well, they got to figure out what this is. Yeah, how they didn't see it coming, I don't know. They keep telling you to turn your cell phone off when you're on an airplane, and I guess this didn't occur to them. But anyway, you got to be careful. And by the way, YouTube, I'm sorry we said the word 5G. It has nothing to do with COVID. Oh, crap. Now I just linked the two of them together. All right. We'll be right back, I think, unless we're deleted.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. 5G, and it has nothing to do with anything health-related as far as I know.
It doesn't. 5G is 5th generation.
Yes.
The next iteration of how you get your signals.
That's all I know about.
And this is a piece in the Seattle Times. Chaos said SeaTac Airport still a risk despite 5G wireless deal. The wireless deal is Verizon and AT&T because Biden brokered this. He talked to them and jawboned them into at least temporarily limiting deployment around airports.
So he knew.
So
what
that
did he
was
know?
also because foreign airlines were refusing to fly into certain U.S. airports. So one of the things you need to know about airports.
Yes.
You need to know a lot of things about airports. If you fly, you need to know nothing about them. If you don't, other than you don't want your house next to one, probably.
Yeah.
But still, the thing about airports is that they don't have a giant cell tower the way you might in your suburb or city.
Okay.
What they have is a lot of little tiny towers scattered all over the place.
Would you rather fight 100-foot tower or 101-foot towers?
They have 101-foot towers. And so that's why you can get terrific cell service in the restaurant that you're having lunch at while you're waiting, or a beer at your bar while you're waiting to board your flight.
You also get
and then as soon as you get to the runway, there's nothing. And then they tell you don't use your cell phone, but you can't because you happen to be in the dead spot anyway.
Oh, yeah, so what's the point?
That happens all the time.
Okay.
And so that's the way they work. And because each airport is configured a little differently, they're not sure if you roll out 5G, how they do that and how each individual airport is going to be affected. This one might not have a problem, that one might. Okay. The pilots are worried about it, that they're going to interfere with the equipment. And so basically what they're doing is banning 5G service on cloudy or hazy days where you might need instrument landing.
What? Okay. Yeah, I don't know how they're going to regulate that, but
despite a last-minute compromise with Verizon and AT&T, brokered by the federal government, that will at least temporarily limit deployment of 5G cell service around airports, limitations on airplane operations at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport still take effect at 9 p.m. Pacific, thanks only to the reasonably clear weather, pretty good for Seattle. Significant flight cancellations are not anticipated. But in a chaotic rollout of the new 5G network service, Federal Aviation Administration flight restrictions remain in place that from Tuesday night forward will stop many airlines from landing at SeaTac if the weather deteriorates, so the cloud ceiling's below 200 feet. And so it's the airports that can turn on and off the service. That's how they can regulate it. And Boeing has issued instructions to airlines about flight restrictions on its airplanes that have already caused some foreign airlines to stop flying 777s into the U.S.
Well, they probably should have stopped that anyway.
So 5G will upend travel, not that the airline industry is having problems anywhere else.
It's like a
so the airlines
volcano.
are upset. The FAA is upset. And Verizon and AT&T want to go ahead and do this anyway. And I just can't figure out how come they haven't studied this before. Why are they declaring it's a problem the day before it's implemented? Well, they're not.
Oh, well.
They've declared it a problem for a while. But why haven't they studied it and cleaned up whether it is or is not an issue? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. There's an awful lot of money at stake, something, but they couldn't decide which large amount of money to pay more attention to, the phone amount of money or the airline amount of money.
Right. The guidance also told airlines flying the 737 MAX that a takeoff and landing performance penalty will apply that will require them to reduce either cargo or passenger weight on the aircraft. I like that. Oh my gosh, it's cloudy before we land. You three who volunteer to sit next to that funny window, you're using it.
I like that the whole thing is set in Seattle, too. Like, well, when the weather's clear, we'll be able to do whatever we want. Yeah, well.
Just that. I want you to be aware that if you sit in this particular seat, if the weather's cloudy, you're going out the window before we land. I'm just telling you.
Right. Nobody you don't have to stop streaming Netflix. We're going to just throw people out the window. That'll work. All right.
Specifically, the 5G signals have the potential to interfere with an instrument called the radio altimeter.
There you go.
Altimeter. Which tells the pilots how high a plane is above the ground or water. It's important if you're taking off or landing. Doesn't matter if you're in the air, unless you're near a mountain.
Or another plane.
Well, in more modern jets, that altitude reading is fed into other systems that can also be affected on Boeing 787, for example.
I didn't know they had any. Okay.
Yeah, good thing there's not a 710-7. For example, the altimeter reading is used to determine the timing and power of the automatic braking system upon landing. Because of such integrated systems, more modern jets like the 787 and 737 MAX are likely greater risk than the 5G network interference.
Well,
so the weight penalty guidance Boeing issued for the MAX under the 5G restrictions, quote, tends to be small unless there's snow and slush on the runway. That's bad. That means even you skinny people are at risk of getting thrown off the plane.
Yeah, well, try not to have snow or slush on the runway.
Right. We're fortunate at Alaska that we don't fly the MAX to many affected cities where the runway condition would be onerous for us, but that's something we have to keep an eye on now.
I guess. Wow.
Okay. Earlier in the day, Verizon and AT&T each bowed to pressure from the White House and Congress and announced the decision to limit 5G network deployment around airports. Democrats made this happen, folks.
Well, found out about the problem and stopped it from crashing planes. Yes. Otherwise, people are going to be walking around saying, my streaming service isn't working. Thanks, Biden. But that's probably going to happen anyway.
Right. So the altimeter's on the Bombardier Q400. That sounds like an aggressive plane.
Rawr.
And the Embraer E-175 regional jet flown by sister carrier Horizon Air to Airbus and Boeing are different than the Airbus and Boeing jets. However, application of the restrictions depends on more than the specific model. They're imposed airport by airport, depending on the positioning of cell towers around the runway. You knew that because I just told you.
Yeah.
And they vary aircraft by aircraft, depending upon how the altimeter is integrated with other systems. So Alaska Airlines said they have to wait for the FAA to finish its work.
I guess you do.
It'll spin at the speed they can safely analyze everything, and that analysis takes a little while to grind through the work. Again, my question is, well, why haven't they started this sooner?
Yes.
I don't get that.
No. Not my
Is this one of those, the IRS doesn't have anybody working there, the CDC can't hire people because nobody wants to work there? Is this another one of you've hollowed out the federal system thanks to policies that don't fund it, plus whatever the Supreme Court says they're not allowed to do? Because next they'll say, well, what business did the FAA have in regulating aviation? Where in the name does it say aviation?
In the middle, but, that's nothing.
Okay.
Right.
OSHA can't do health. Why should the FAA be able to do aviation? We have a precedent, and we respect precedents.
Right.
Our precedent is we didn't let OSHA do it. Why should we let the FAA do it?
We went off the rails last time, so shouldn't we go off the rails now?
Well, no. You were right in your criticisms. From now on, we're following our precedents that we set.
Yeah. And this is the one we've got.
I'm not a lawyer, but it makes sense to me.
All right. Well, that's what an unusual
So basically, it's an airline by airline, fleet by fleet, airport by airport thing.
Terrific.
Sounds like it'll take some time. Seems to me they should have started on this earlier. That's all I'm saying. I'm just a layman.
Yeah, I mean,
if any of you understand why it took so long to do this, tell David.
I don't know. Right. Study it along with why is everybody having their cryptocurrency stolen?
Right, because I'm not really interested in being corrected, but he really wants to know, so tell me.
Yeah, right. Line up. I can't hear you. 5G.
Something like that. Can you hear me now?
It's a good excuse. I would use it for being late to school, for getting your homework, anything else that might go wrong during your day. 5G, sorry.
Yeah, so a few other tidbits in this relatively shortened, this is a post-holiday show. Monday is officially a holiday.
Right.
So there's a lot less stuff going on than you'd otherwise think. What does it mean if Republicans won't debate? I don't know if you heard, but the Republican National Committee is directing their candidates not to participate in the debates in the next presidential election, which is silly for a variety of reasons. Yes, the debates themselves may be silly, but whoever the nominee is will install their own RNC.
Oh, yes.
So if they direct
people
the next time to do anything, it doesn't matter because as soon as there's a new nominee, you get a whole bunch of new people at the RNC, and they'll decide what the RNC is going to do at that time.
New rule, we're back in the debates. That could be. That's true.
So, it's one of the weird things. It's not like these national committees have any power, but what little power they do disappears as soon as you get a new nominee anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
And beyond that, it's just a reminder, Julia Azari, a political scientist in 538, says, what should we think about this development? For starters, the RNC's reasons to prohibit participation in the debates are important. And that's because they fall in line with an important strain of Trumpism, a claim to being victims of unfair treatment. To be fair, evidence does show some important cultural institutions, including news media, are more likely to be populated by Democrats than Republicans.
Everywhere it is.
But conflict between presidential campaigns and debate organizers about the journalists who moderate the debates is hardly one-sided or new. After all, the purpose of debates is to allow voters to see candidates perform under pressure and to evaluate their responses, like Trump stalking Hillary on the stage, for example, which is why he lost all 3 debates. He didn't lose the election, but he certainly lost the debates. That's why he doesn't want to do them. The other thing that strikes me about that whole statement there is a concept that gets glided over all the time and never really properly understood.
Yes.
I don't know if you've seen, but Gallup claims, and they're not a great pollster anymore, that a lot of people are abandoning the Democratic Party, and there's more independents than ever. And if you look at Republicans versus Democrat, there's more Republicans than Democrats, which is unusual. But if you look at Republicans, Democrats, Independents, way, way, way more, like 41 compared to 25. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head of either party. 41 are independents.
Okay. Sure.
Which makes sense. In Connecticut, independents are by far the largest political party. See, the point is this. If those people switch parties, and they are allowed to, okay, when does somebody stop being from that party? This person is a Democrat. Well, they were 20 years ago. They've been independent. Take the Never Trumpers, for example.
Please.
They're Republican. No, they're not. They're independents. That's why they're Never Trumpers. But if I'm doing a story about polarization and culture institutions, and one of them is on the committee, I'm going to call them a Republican.
Yes.
They're not Republicans. True. They haven't been Republicans since Trump won the nomination. Why are you calling them Republican? Because it's good for my story. So my narrative is you're always what you were, and you absolutely positively cannot ever change, even though everybody changes.
Yeah, that's not great.
So now you have these other people who you don't even know who they are. Well, they're Democrat. How do you know? Because they registered as a Democrat 30 years ago. Well, what are they now? Oh, I don't know, but that doesn't matter. I have a story to write, and I'm going to write it.
Well, I guess it's a widespread practice, certainly. I mean, TV seems to be, Fox anyway, full of people who say that they were lifelong Democrats, but just changed their mind and became loyal Trump voters. And would you meet them in the diner, and they'll tell you why. But they're able to say,
but see, the same thing is they have this concept that if you're a Democrat, you're always a Democrat. Simultaneously, they have this concept of I was a lifelong liberal Democrat until they did this, and now all of a sudden I'm voting Republican.
Right. That happens.
Well, which is it?
The other one doesn't. Yeah, all right, it's whatever they need, I guess. You're right. At the time, whatever's convenient.
Don't pay attention to stories like that. They're just bullshit. That's what I'm telling you.
I can live with that. Okay, well, do you have any that aren't bullshit?
Well, there's Dan Frumkin writing here.
Okay.
I keep coming back to this. The Republican Party has gone stark, raving, brown shirt crazy, but is still expected to win back Congress. And political journalists are going, yeah, okay, instead of going, what the
Yes, that's true. I did see that. And I don't know why.
Right, otherwise, in the proper polite press, it's labeled, the year accountability died.
Yeah. Right, I saw that.
Our elite media can't bring itself to say the party has gone batshit crazy.
Yes, because, FCC rules and whatnot. But beyond that, they still can't bring themselves to say it. So, I read that article, and, it certainly makes – the best point is in that tweet. Why aren't people – like, what will it take to get people to say, yeah, there's something different about this. This is not – you can't be this should be a huge disruption to your model. I can't be fair and balanced by getting a quote from both parties anymore.
Right. And so, to me, again, I don't think it's the smoking gun, but I still think the January 6th committee presentation is going to be very valuable because you can't both sides it because there aren't both sides on the committee. You have Kissinger and you have Liz Cheney, so you can say Republicans and Democrats both say this. You can do that if you want to.
Yeah, which is why I guess there's an effort underway to try to expel the two of them from the Republican Party so that they can claim, no, it isn't bipartisan, but it still will be bipartisan because they're not Democrats. They're from another party, I guess, whatever you want to call it. So still bipartisan. It's just that Republicans no longer fit in the circle that we call bipartisanship. And that's a great point to make. Thank you for making it for us.
Jamie Dupree reports that Senator Josh Hawley, Republican Missouri, criticized a Senate resolution passed last week which honored the U.S. Capitol custodial staff for cleaning up after the January 6th attack.
Yes, you should have left it.
He says it was wrong to say the attack was perpetuated by violent insurrectionists.
Well, that's true.
That's a quote. I think he meant perpetrated, so I guess he's correct there.
He's right.
To me, what he's really saying is these were not violent insurrectionists. The mess made itself.
Well, it's the party.
I mean, how do you think all that litter happened, Hawley?
Freedom, I imagine, would be the answer you'd have to give because there's no other one. I don't know. Yeah, right. Okay, so he's opposed to that. So no thank you for cleaning the stuff up. Screw you, because it was there naturally and you should have left it.
So that's in the pundit roundup. And then this last story I'll give you before I go is a really depressing one because it's about Maine, one of my favorite states.
That is,
and it's in Washington Monthly. Do Democrats who supported Susan Collins in 2020 regret their vote? No.
Oh, that is depressing. Well, we'll come up there and beat you up.
They don't, because they simply don't accept that the Republicans are super radical. They don't accept why. Here's a fellow who is Joe Bean, not related to the famous L.L. Bean family of Maine.
Oh, okay.
But he does embody another Maine tradition, political independent, like Angus King. He's not formally affiliated with a party. He votes mostly with Democrats, except he votes for Susan Collins. So, a lot of this is, I've made up my mind, don't bother me with facts. In recent years, Democrats have relied on disgust generated by the antics of Trump, and in Maine, Paul LePage. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, it's worked. Republicans haven't put forward somebody Bean could stomach for years, except for Susan Collins.
Well, that's wrong.
Why? Because he sees her as continuing to try to be the bridge between the parties. That is her brand, and she successfully pushed that line, even though it's bullshit.
Yeah, well...
Bean, a retired hospital executive who has lived in Maine all his life, wants to see major Democratic initiatives such as Build Back Better, but he considered Sarah Gideon a partisan and Collins as somebody who will get things done. He doesn't know why Biden didn't appoint somebody like Senator Bill Cohen, a Republican, to the cabinet so he could be bipartisan.
Oh. He did.
Why don't you talk to the senators on the other side who might be willing to make a deal? You see, people in Maine have this concept, the ones who voted for Collins, that there are Republicans who are willing to make a deal, and you're just not talking to them. So when Manchin and Sinema say this stuff, it works in Maine too, because people really believe that. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't understand why, but they do.
Well, they should run in Maine.
Well, they can run. Well, at least Manchin can run where he lives and get elected if he wants.
To Maine instead.
Bean framed the problem in an inverse way. If there's a danger to democracy, it's in the presence of extreme partisanship. So you need people like Collins who like her in the middle.
All right. Well,
I mean, and he's not the only one. They go through a whole bunch of this stuff. I'm turned off by the ads attacking Susan Collins. Right, because it's offensive. This is a newspaperman, Bill Green, a Maine newspaperman, very well known, who's a Democrat, but Susan Collins is his friend. And so when they're your friend, you find all sorts of excuses for what they do. Collins' votes in the Senate since her reelection have been fine with him. She helped defeat For the People Act, making Election Day a federal holiday. Restoring eligibility to felons to serve their sentences, keeping names on voting rolls. This goes far beyond preserving the right to vote. Green wasn't convinced either that such sweeping action was necessary in response to laws such as Georgia's, which forbids giving water to people waiting in line.
Yeah, why not? I don't know.
He said, I don't know about that law. And then here's the quote. Here's the money quote. Leave it to Susan. I trust her. It's got nothing to do with logic and facts. So, same with Manchin, same with Sinema. So logic and facts has nothing to do with it. I like her. I've decided to vote for her. I'm going to justify everything she does because otherwise that would be saying I was wrong. I'm not going to do that. So leave me alone and stop asking me, because if you keep asking me, I'm going to tell you, I don't know about that. I know you're correcting me. I know I'm wrong. I don't care. I trust Susan. That's her brand. And so that's why she won.
Yeah. Well, I don't know
because there
why.
were enough of people like that. I mean, they found a whole bunch of them for this article, and there were enough people who voted that way. And look, what it means is that you have to make the case in a way that doesn't seem like you're attacking somebody. You just have to do it with a light touch, not a heavy touch.
I guess. Well, I say...
And you got to do it over time. You can't just do it during campaign season. I want to remind you what I've been telling you all along about this.
What?
That kind of thing.
Oh, that you're deeply concerned as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the deeply concerned thing really works where she lives. She knows her constituency and they know her.
All right. Well, I want to ask Olympia what she thinks of Susan. I think that's changed.
Yeah.
But she's not talking, so... and she knows what keeps her bread buttered, too, I guess. So.
Anyway, stridently pointing out that we're about to lose our democracy doesn't apparently work with a lot of people because they don't believe you.
Yeah.
And by the time they do, it's going to be too late. And then some of them don't really care because the important thing is, like, I don't want to pay attention to this.
That seems to be a chief driver. Okay.
All right, so there you have it. So that's the roundup for today. A little depressing, but then again, we're at the bottom. The only way to go from here is up.
I hope I have something. I'm going to search around now and see what I got that's more uplifting than that.
Been down so long seems like up to me. So that was Richard.
So
Freeman.
There's that. Right. Okay. All right. Well, that's enough of that crap.
Well, just what's going on.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the story, and I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll find some more uplifting thing. Remember, pandemic's getting better. Yeah. The response to the pandemic on the part of the administration is getting better. That will eventually have an effect. The economy is doing okay in some areas. Biden needs to be forceful about declaring he's taking care of inflation. Of course, that has nothing to do with what presidents do. That's not the point. The point is he has to forcefully declare that that's what he's doing.
In Maine.
Yes. Well, price controls in Maine.
I think that's where he should go to do it because apparently that kind of stuff works there.
Right. The price of moose has to be regulated.
Price of moose. All right. Well, fine. Yeah. I don't think
leave lobster alone.
Guess
Don't
so.
touch the lobster, okay? Just do the moose.
Okay.
Also, and blueberries. Leave the blueberries alone.
Oh, right. All right. Well, anything else? We can ask Bill. He list anything else that needs exemption in Maine.
I'm not touching the squirrels. That's Bill's department.
Yeah,
so,
well, that's all covered.
With that, read the Pundit Roundup, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. And, we'll find some more maybe uplifting things that I can share with you. Let's see.
Hey, it's over freezing for the first time in a couple of days.
That's nice.
It's 33 degrees. That's good.
That's technically all it takes.
Yeah, it'll be freezing in the next few days, but at least today it's going to hit 40, so that's good. Sunbathing, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
In Iceland, they'd go out in shorts.
That's in Iceland. It's summer, 34 degrees. So, okay.
All righty.
Take care.
About
global warming. Great. Okay. So stand by for Thursday. Thursday coming tomorrow. And let's see. In between now and then, we have just a couple of minutes before our next break. We can update you on this weird story that circulated yesterday. The governor of Florida is a weird guy, and a lot of people think he's bad at his job. And this is more news in that vein. Florida governor proposes special police agency to monitor elections, reports the Washington Post. That seems like a new thing. At least that's what I'm taking away from the subheader, which says no state has such a force, which Governor Ron Desantis wants empowered to arrest voters and others who allegedly violate election laws, which, I would say might be your fake electoral college delegates, but probably won't include them. So nothing wrong with that, right? Ron DeSantis will hire a personal cadre of quote-unquote election police. Maybe they're Proud Boys, or used to be Proud Boys, or Oath Keepers, or something like that. But for today, they're election police, and they'll be empowered to arrest voters, which is a great thing to do when you are a politician. The report here is filed by Lori Rosa and Beth Reinhard, and reads as follows, and so as far as I can get it in before our break. And Dateline West Palm Beach, Florida. So that might tell us a little something about what's going on here. A plan by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis would establish a special police force to oversee state elections, because they're lawless down there. The first of its kind in the nation. And while his fellow Republicans have reacted tepidly, voting rights advocates fear that it will become law and be used to intimidate voters. It will. The proposed Office of Election Crimes and Security. You should be an anti-election crimes and security, in my view, if you were going to open a government office. But he wants to open an election crime office. It would be part of the Department of State, which answers to the governor, as opposed to the law enforcement divisions, I guess, where it would be out of his control. DeSantis is asking the GOP-controlled legislature to allocate nearly $6 million to hire 52 people to, quote, investigate, detect, apprehend, and arrest anyone for an alleged violation of election laws, like voting for Democrats. They would be stationed at unspecified field offices throughout the state. That would be minority polling stations, and act on tips from, quote, government officials or any other person, like Paul Gosar, who can tell from a distance that there's voting shenanigans going on in Florida. DeSantis highlighted his plan as legislators opened their annual 60-day session last week. To ensure that elections are conducted in accordance with the rule of law, I propose an election integrity unit whose sole focus will be the enforcement of Florida's election laws, he said during his State of the State address. This will facilitate the faithful enforcement of election laws and will provide Floridians with the confidence that their vote will matter. Why it's not under the law enforcement divisions, well, I would say I have no idea, except we do have an idea. He wants it under his personal control, so that he can arrest voters for his opponents. Voting rights experts say no state has such an agency, one dedicated to patrolling elections and empowered to arrest suspected violators. That's a brand new thing. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, also a Republican and cheater, announced the formation of a 2021 Texas Election Integrity Unit in October, but that office is more limited in scope, has fewer than 10 employees, and isn't under the governor's authority. That's because he's not governor. He's attorney general. It's under his authority. There's a reason that there's no office of this size with this kind of unlimited investigative authority in any other state in the country, and it's because election crimes and voter fraud are just not a problem of that magnitude, said Jonathan Diaz, a voting rights lawyer at the nonprofit Campaign Legal Center. My number one concern is that this is going to be used as a tool to harass or intimidate civic engagement organizations and voters. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Let's continue finding out about the extraordinarily wise and fair-sounding creation of election police in Florida under the direct control of Governor Ron DeSantis. That won't go wrong. Florida's congressional Democrats expressed similar worries, that is to say, similar to the the voting rights lawyer who said, yeah, this is, we worry, going to be used as a tool to harass or intimidate civic engagement organizations and voters, right? If somebody says, I saw one of those guys who was doing the voter registration drive throw a card in the garbage, it must mean that they're throwing out the registration of Republicans who are notorious for registering to vote with activists on the street registering minorities in depressed parts of town. Sure. Anyway, let's arrest all of them and make sure that they can't, register anyone else to vote, for instance. Like I said, Florida's congressional Democrats expressed similar worries when they asked the U.S. Justice Department to investigate a disturbing rise in partisan efforts at voter suppression in the state. They took aim specifically at DeSantis' call for election police. Harmful proposals to create new partisan bodies to oversee our voting process are exactly the kind of action that demand oversight as we work to ensure that our voting process is unquestionably trustworthy, they wrote on Thursday in a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland, who will doubtless spring directly into action on this. Unlike many past elections, the 2020 general election in Florida had few problems. Amazing. The governor touted it as the gold standard. So now, of course, you need a police force to keep it gold, I guess. The way Florida did it, I think, inspired confidence, DeSantis said on November 4th, 2020, hours after the results showed that President Donald Trump had won the state by more than 3 percentage points. I think that's how elections should be run. They come out with Donald Trump as the winner. But in the wake of Trump's ultimate defeat, as he and his supporters spread falsehoods about election fraud nationwide and demanded audits in numerous states, many Republicans in Florida pressed DeSantis to do the same. Though he resisted an audit, because he had already been on record saying it was awesome, DeSantis signed a controversial bill last year curtailing some voting options that that had helped, not that he helped expand, but that had helped to expand participation. The law, which is being challenged in court, with trial set to begin January 30th, limits the use of ballot drop boxes, of course, adds requirements to request mail ballots, of course, and bans groups or individuals from gathering absentee ballots on other voters' behalf. No legislators have signed on to sponsor DeSantis' new proposal. House Speaker Chris Sprowls, Republican, of course, said DeSantis is concerned that existing law enforcement agencies don't have the expertise necessary to find and prosecute election crimes. And, of course, as you know, thus far, non-existent police forces under the direct control of the governor also don't have the expertise necessary to find and prosecute election crimes. They can't because they don't exist. Now, the people who do have that expertise have got to be hired. They could be hired for existing police forces to acquire that expertise, or you could hire them into Space Force or something else that doesn't exist and fill the things out that way. But why would you do it? Why create a new agency that needs new everything as opposed to hiring experts at the agency that you fear lacks expertise? And the answer is because I want to be able to control it. So, okay. So what else does Sprowls have to say here? Let's see. DeSantis is concerned that existing law enforcement agencies don't have the expertise, yet he hasn't embraced the governor's approach. We're going to look at it, we'll evaluate it, and see what happens. Oh, very Trumpy, Sprowls said last week. So Donald Trump very happy with that, I'm sure. We'll see what happens. As with all committees in the Capitol in Tallahassee, Republicans are in the majority on the House Public Integrity and Elections Committee. Neither the committee chairman nor the vice chairman returned calls for comment. The panel has not scheduled a hearing on the DeSantis proposal. Last month, Secretary of State Laurel Lee spoke to a meeting of the Florida Supervisors of Elections Association to explain the governor's plan. Well, we want election cops. The end. Some of the officials who run elections in each of Florida's 67 counties were alarmed by what they heard. They fear overreach from the executive branch, especially in a year when DeSantis is running for re-election. Broward County Supervisor of Elections Joe Scott, he's got 2 first names, so you know he's serious, said he's concerned that the new unit would be applied in a very partisan way, and certain that his heavily Democratic county would be a target. It seems as if this is going to focus on a lot of grassroots organizations that are out there trying to get people registered to vote, as well as people out there doing petition drives, Scott said. I think this is going to lead to people being intimidated if they're civically involved. I don't want people to be scared away from doing those kinds of things. But Ron DeSantis does. So therefore, it's got to happen. State Representative Geraldine Thompson, the ranking Democrat on the House Public Integrity and Elections Committee, said the new agency would be a waste of money. That's also true, but okay. It might not be your initial focus, but I guess she's looking to go after those fiscal hawks. It's a waste of money. In addition to its funding, DeSantis wants $1.1 million for 8 new positions in other departments to address what he describes as a growing caseload of election crimes. The Department of State received 262 election fraud complaint forms in 2020 and referred 75 to law enforcement or prosecutors. About 11 million Floridians cast ballots for president that November, resulting in 75 things for law enforcement or prosecutors to do. Got to have a new department. By the way, I mean, if you really want it to make this department work, just go arrest all the Republicans in the villages. Then you'll have found all of your fraudulent voters, and you've captured some innocent ones in your dragnet, but you can work on letting them go in due time. The governor and other officials in Florida said the 2020 elections was the most secure and efficiently run election we ever had, Thompson said. So, I see absolutely no reason for this elections commission to be established, particularly at the cost that he's proposing. Now, voter fraud, it is pointed out here, is rare, and critics note that state attorneys and local police are already in place to investigate alleged election crimes. The state's 67 election supervisors are also trained to look for fraud. The bottom line is there is no widespread fraud in elections in Florida, said Hillsborough State Attorney Andrew Warren, a Democrat. It's a microscopic amount. Elections today are the most secure they've ever been. This is not a serious policy proposal. This is a door prize for a QAnon pep rally. Nicely said there. Who are we talking about here again? I'm gonna go back and read that guy's name. Hillsborough State Attorney Andrew Warren, Democrat in, I guess, Hillsborough County, the state's attorney there. Okay, not a serious proposal. This is a door prize for a QAnon pep rally. Hans Van Spakovsky, who's not dead yet, an election law expert, which he really isn't, at the Conservative Heritage Foundation, which it is, supports DeSantis' plan, so you know it's bad, and hopes it becomes a, quote, model for other states. Investigating election fraud requires special training and commitment that are lacking in many law enforcement agencies, he said. The foundation's database of election fraud cases nationwide shows only 3 convictions in Florida in the last 3 years, so you're definitely going to have 8 people investigating or whatever. Support for the governor's proposal should be bipartisan, according to DeSantis Press Secretary Christina Pushaw, however she pronounces that name. Ensuring that every legal vote counts, and Governor DeSantis strives to do, is the opposite of voter suppression. Sure, there you go. Pushaw said in an email, "We do not understand why any politician, Democrat or Republican, would be opposed to allocating sufficient resources to ensure our election laws are enforced." And, of course, the answer is, well, there already are sufficient resources. If there weren't, then there might possibly be lots more fraud. But since there isn't, the resources must be sufficient. But never mind that. I need to say this. What else is left here? Cecile Schoon, a lawyer who is presiding. A lawyer who is president. I don't know how I got to that. A lawyer, she is presiding as president of the League of Women Voters in Florida, called an elections security force controlled by a governor an alarming concept. That's true. So, to have your own elections SWAT team that would be under the direction of the Secretary of State, who is under the direction of the governor, is not a comfortable feeling, Schoon said. Having governmental officials like this traveling about, overlooking elections just to see if there's something going on, is very chilling, very scary, and very reminiscent of past governmental interference that was directed to black voters. And, well, she seems to be largely right about this. Didn't see any indication here why the byline or the dateline was from West Palm Beach as opposed to Tallahassee. I was kind of hoping to see something about that, but it might not make any particular difference. I just was now curious. Was that where the last or many of the experts that they interviewed were headquartered? I don't really know why I was just wondering, because West Palm Beach and the Palm Beach area is Trump HQ, even though I think the county is largely Democratic. So I'm sort of curious how they ended up filing from West Palm as opposed to Tallahassee. But okay, no indication there. So we'll just say, I'm sure everything's on the up and up with the reporters. I don't see any reason to say otherwise. All right, let's see. Can I read the Bloomberg article here, or is it paywalled? Yeah, I think it's kind of paywalled. I'm wondering about it. I just happened to see this. Just want to keep tabs on this stuff. Bloomberg reporting here. UK officials told to be ready for crisis mode over Russia. Just things continue to escalate with respect to Russia and its activities in Ukraine. Their bullet points as subheaders here read, this comes as Russia escalates tensions near the Ukraine border. Moscow denies invasion plans but demands security guarantees. We told you about that a couple weeks ago. And what snippets I can read here before the paywall kicks in. Officials at the UK Foreign Office have been told to be ready to move into crisis mode at very short notice, highlighting the increased concern that Russia's aggression toward Ukraine could escalate into conflict, according to a person familiar with the matter. Staff at the department were informed of the request this week. Triggering it would mean officials and diplomats are redeployed to work on Russia and Ukraine policy and to prioritize UK response to any further spike in tensions, including deterrence and sanctions. So UK going on alert at a difficult time for them politically. But yeah, that's sort of still hanging out there. Did I put away or keep here in pocket the information on, I guess, heightened tensions in Ukraine and the worries that they might be conducting false flag operations there to try and come up with a pretext for invasion. I must have archived it, I think. And I noted in passing that it was out there, but I thought about possibly using this as an entry point to circle back and figure out exactly what it is that they're doing. But now I don't even see, even in the archives, see the article I was thinking of. So I don't know. Maybe it's still here in the main pocket mode, and but just buried under that much more incoming news of various kinds. I don't know. It's too bad. I meant to read that and get everybody worried and upset again over what's happening in Ukraine. But we'll just keep one eye on it is the best we can do. Here we are. The New York Times piece. All of a sudden, now it becomes easier to find. U.S. says Russia sent saboteurs into Ukraine to create pretext for invasion. The Biden administration said the operatives were trained in urban warfare and explosives and could try to stage an incident. David Sanger reporting the other day, end of last week, for the New York Times. The White House accused Moscow on Friday of sending saboteurs into eastern Ukraine to stage an incident that could provide Putin with a pretext for ordering an invasion of the country. The administration didn't release any details of the evidence it had collected, but Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, said the operatives were trained in urban warfare and explosives, but we're taking their word for it now. Russia is laying the groundwork to have the option of fabricating a pretext for invasion, she said, including through sabotage activities and information operations, by accusing Ukraine of preparing an imminent attack against Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. She said the Russian military planned to begin these activities several weeks before a military invasion, which could begin between mid-January, that's now, and mid-February. Well, that's later. So, there's a range. Boy. She said Moscow was using the same playbook it did in 2014. That's why we think this could be happening, when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula, a part of Ukraine. John F. Kirby, Pentagon spokesman, called the intelligence about the operation very credible, take it for what it's worth, when asked about it at a news briefing on Friday. Two other American officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, said the U.S. assessment was the result of a combination of intercepts and movements on the ground of particular individuals. That could explain the administration's reluctance to declassify granular information for fear of alerting the Russian operatives whose movements are being tracked. The American allegations were clearly part of a strategy to try to prevent an attack by exposing it in advance, but without releasing the underlying intelligence, some of which has been provided to allies and shown to key members of Congress, the United States opened itself up to Russian charges that it was fabricating evidence. In past years, Russia frequently recalled the deeply flawed intelligence case that the United States built for invading Iraq as part of an effort to discredit the CIA and other American intelligence agencies as political operatives. The accusation by the United States came a day after the conclusion of a week of diplomatic encounters with Russia, moving from Geneva to Brussels to Vienna in an effort to de-escalate the confrontation, but those talks ended without any agreement to pull back the approximately 100,000 Russian troops massed at the Ukrainian border, or for the United States or NATO to accept Moscow's demands that they pull back all forces from former Warsaw Pact countries that have joined NATO, which seems incongruous, I guess, and unbalanced. Like the idea of, well, you have troops on the border waiting to invade a sovereign country, whereas we have troops in countries that have said, would you please send us some troops and let us join NATO? And we said yes. Now, of course, I suppose if you want to dispute all of that, you could be, I'm sure Russia is saying, well, what choice did you give them? And was it really a free choice of theirs to join NATO? Maybe you coerced them into it, or maybe you arrived with your troops first and asked later. I don't know. I think the evidence is on the side of against that, but I'm sure that they could tell their own people to believe such a thing and have it work. Russia has also demanded that the United States remove all of its nuclear weapons from Europe and that Ukraine, Belarus, and Georgia, 3 surrounding states that were once part of the Soviet Empire, never join NATO. I don't know if that's really in the cards for Belarus. I think there's actually some joint Russian-Belarus military exercises going on now, as a matter of fact. It is still unclear whether Mr. Putin believes those are realistic strategic objectives. Wendy R. Sherman, the Deputy Secretary of State, called them non-starters this week, or whether his true focus is on bringing Ukraine to heel. The Russian president wants to expand his country's sphere of influence to include more of the old Soviet bloc, especially former Soviet republics like Ukraine. The United States has vowed both severe financial and technological sanctions if Russia invades, and it has said it would consider arming a Ukrainian insurgency, to make any Russian occupation expensive and bloody. By the way, it worked great in Afghanistan. It kind of did, but then we fell into that trap instead. Both Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and General Mark Milley, who, by the way, I saw reported on Twitter the other day, has COVID, but I guess is working through it. Both Defense Secretary Austin and General Milley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have warned their Russian counterparts in recent telephone calls that any swift Russian victory in Ukraine would probably be followed by a bloody insurgency similar to the one that drove the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. I don't know if that's a great model or if it's true, but I guess that was designed to worry them. After the Biden administration made the new accusations against Russia, Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat of California and chair of the House Intelligence Committee, said the news underscored the need to provide Ukraine with the defensive weapons needed to deter aggression and, if unsuccessful at deterrence, make a Russian invasion costly to the invaders. Now, that's actually what the Ukrainians were looking for in terms of support at the time when the former guy was pressuring them to give him what he needed, or what he thought he needed, for a negative campaign against Joe Biden by opening an investigation into him in Ukraine, and only then would they get the weapons that they would need to defend themselves or stage a costly insurgency post-Russian invasion. But he was serving two ends with that. One, he got to blackmail the Ukrainians, and two, got to keep them unarmed and undefended for his friend Putin. How wonderful. Only selling out other sovereign nations for political gain, not anything you should say be impeached about, right? The Kremlin pushed back against the intelligence assessment. So far, all these statements have been unfounded and have not been confirmed by anything. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, told TASS the state-run news agency. The intelligence finding was reported earlier by CNN. One senior Biden administration official said there was concern that saboteurs or provocateurs could stage an incident in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, creating a possible pretext for a coup, as opposed to just the outright invasion. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine declared several months ago that he believed a coup attempt was underway, but it never materialized. Well, that's good news for you. Ukraine's military intelligence service announced earlier on Friday that it had intercepted information about a plot by Russian spies to start a sabotage operation from disputed territory in Moldova, south of Ukraine, where Russia maintains a large contingent of troops. The plan, according to the intelligence service, was to attack Russian troops stationed at a weapons depot near the border with Ukraine and blame it on Ukrainian forces. A senior Ukrainian military official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss intelligence matters said that while not all details of the plot were known, any provocation in that region could be used to justify an attack on Ukraine's southern flank, possibly from Russian naval resources in the Black Sea. Remember that? We were just talking about the Black Sea a couple days ago. Just as Ukraine was making that accusation, a cyber attack hit the websites of its foreign ministry and a range of other government agencies, but the attack appeared somewhat amateurish, producing propaganda but doing little real damage. Cyber analysts concluded it could easily have been mounted by hackers, including pro-Russian hackers, and showed none of the sophistication of recent government-led Russian attacks. In its allegations against Russia, the United States also warned of disinformation operations. A statement from the administration outlining the charges said that Russian influence actors are already starting to fabricate Ukrainian provocations in state and social media to justify a Russian intervention and sow divisions in Ukraine. Those include emphasizing narratives about the deterioration of human rights in Ukraine and the increased militancy of Ukrainian leaders. In his Pentagon news briefing, Mr. Kirby said that when we talk about Russian operatives, it could represent a blend of individuals inside the Russian government, whether it's from their intelligence communities, their security service, or even their military. He said that the Russians frequently worked in ways where it was not necessarily really clear who they specifically report to in the conduct of some of these more covert and clandestine operations. That was the case in 2014 when Moscow sent military forces without uniforms into the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed forces have been fighting a grinding war of attrition with the Ukrainian government. So, yeah, pretty much making available any sort of tactic and not constrained at all by the usual international codes that govern these things, like the breakdown of civility and entry into war. It's kind of ironic. But there you have it. All right, so I guess we're up to date on the allegations and the denial of those allegations by the Russians, which usually means they're up to something. And time to find out what. All right, let's see. Other things perhaps worth discussing, although our break is looming. Let's see. Pandemic news that we could save for tomorrow, perhaps. And a few other bits. Oh, you know what? Pandemic news that loops back to Florida, I thought might be of some interest. Maybe we can fit that in the next minute or two. James Sarwecki tweeting here this thread based on a Sun Sentinel article from down in Florida. If you had questions about the way Florida reports its virus numbers these days, well, he agrees with you. This is ridiculous, he says in reference to this article, because of the absurd way that Florida reports deaths. There's literally no way to tell how many people died of COVID in Florida over this past week. So it's preposterous to declare, as they did in the government there, that it has the second lowest death rate in the nation. I guess that's something they're clinging to, but by most accounts, no, not even actually close. And let's see what Worldometers has to say about them at the moment. Let's just search through here as deaths per million in population go. Florida still reporting a relatively decent number in terms of where it ranks among the states. That is to say, 17th in the nation, but still reporting 2,954 deaths per million in population, approaching in the official numbers here, one in every 300? I guess so, yeah, right? But at any rate, this is, it's not good news, to say the least, or I guess one in every 500 is the 3,000 threshold that they're going to hit here soon. All right, well, way behind on the music, so might as well roll that out. And we'll cut out early at an unusual spot in the music that'll make for an awkward edit later. Now you're up to speed on all of the fantastic news here. All right, we'll be back after 2 minutes and the weird music, regroup, and find a direction forward from here. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio at this odd time in the music, because of the point at which we began rolling the music. Things to catch up on, things to add here. I want to continue, I think, with James Surowiecki and his thread on Florida reporting on COVID numbers. Rather than read through the Sun Sentinel piece, we'll read through his retelling of their story through his tweet thread. As he explains here, in its weekly situation reports, Florida reports a weekly death number, but that number, bizarrely, reflects neither all the backlogged deaths that the state reported that week, nor the deaths that occurred in the state that week, but what seems to be some random collection of the two. How can that be? I don't know. Let's see what James explains. The result is, though, that the weekly death numbers in Florida's situation reports dramatically understate the number of deaths that are occurring. And I think we've long suspected that not only in Florida, but around the country, where, at least in certain states, officials, like with the voting stuff and the definition of who gets to vote, the definition of who died and who died from what and who gets to say how that person died or any other people died, is what leads experts to believe that maybe excess deaths is what we ought to be measuring, since there are a number of states that have political motivations for minimizing the number of people who, reported to have died from COVID. They're dead, and they're dead from COVID. We just don't want to say so because that makes us look bad. So Florida among them. I suspect that there are many other states that do something similar so that they can understate their numbers. And sometimes it's political, and sometimes, I guess it's quasi-political, where it's not so much that the state authorities want to minimize the numbers as they, I don't know, I guess it is that they want to minimize the numbers, but not just minimize numbers in general, but minimize the numbers that can be attributed to COVID. And here enters the debate among the people who try to decide whether it makes a difference, whether people are hospitalized or die with COVID or from COVID. And they use that to their advantage. Well, if they died of pneumonia that was brought on by the COVID, very frequently the cause of death among people who we would, in normal world, consider to have died of COVID. Well, they died from pneumonia. That's different. COVID is something else. COVID could give you pneumonia. Yeah, and pneumonia can kill you. And but for the COVID, you wouldn't have had the pneumonia. If you're a 23-year-old gym teacher or something and you die of pneumonia in the middle of summer, I think you could put your finger on the COVID at that point. But some states just refusing to do it. So in Florida, weirdly, they are reporting deaths and they are reporting that they died from COVID. They're just reporting the numbers in a weird way. They're either they're not giving you the grand total of people who, either the deaths reports were backlogged or that they are current deaths from this week, but some of the deaths from this week and some of the deaths from weeks prior get lumped together in some number according to no formula whatsoever. That's kind of weird. So the result is that the weekly death numbers in Florida's situation reports dramatically understate the number of deaths that are occurring. Not until weeks or maybe even months from now, and only by digging back through CDC tables will we know how many COVID deaths happened in Florida this past week. Here's a concrete example, he says. In its most recent situation report, and this is a tweet from January 9th, so there's a more recent situation report, but in what was then the most recent situation report, covering the period from the end of last year, December 31st, through January 6th, Florida reported 44 deaths. A link to that reporting system. And a screen grab, I guess, demonstrating this. Let me take a look at this. The COVID-19 Weekly Situation Report State Overview. Total new case positivity, by the way, 31.2%. Yowza. That's in the previous week. Cumulatively, over the entirety of the pandemic, I guess a 23.2% positivity rate. How many deaths in the previous week? Reported here, 44. I can see it with my own eyes. What does it mean? By the way, data include only Florida residents. They love to point out for you as well. What does James have to say about this? So sure, they're reporting the 44 deaths. Yet, over that same stretch of time, Florida hospitals, which report COVID deaths directly to the CDC, reported how many deaths? Care to guess? 44? Not 44. 88. Not 88. Whatever twice that is. What is that? 176 or something like that? I'll get my calculator out so we can do. But the joke is ruined now. 44 times 2. 88. It's not 88. It's not 176. Is it twice that? Well, not quite. At least we didn't go that far. That would be crazy. But the hospitals said that 285 people died in the last week alone from COVID. That is the week from what was then the previous week, 12/31 through 1/6. Florida says 44 for some reason. And that number doesn't include at-home deaths or nursing home deaths. So needless to say, a lot more than 44 people died of COVID between December 31st and January 6th. And here's a screen grab of the numbers. I guess, what are we looking at, by county or something like that? And they just, or by hospital. And there's a long list of people that add up to a larger number, I guess to 285, much larger than 44. I genuinely don't get where the 44 deaths number comes from. And the Department of Health doesn't explain the source of the number in its notes. But what it isn't, is what any reasonable person reading the report would think it was, the number of COVID deaths that happened in Florida in the last week. Kind of problematic. There is no good reason for Florida to report deaths the way it does. I don't know why the Department of Health has chosen to report a misleading death number in its weekly reports to the public, but whatever the intention, the effect is to obfuscate and mislead. And, it's confirming a lot of suspicions from all over the place, from around the country and around the world. Everybody's a little bit suspicious of this. Take a look at what it, this answers the question. The Florida, the Sun Sentinel's article here is paywalled, so that makes it impossible to read. So I guess Sir Wiki's summary of it is all we have. But anyway, it gives an interesting set of specifics. We always thought there was something wrong with the number, and we always thought it was low. Now we have some idea of exactly how low it is, and some idea that they must be pulling numbers out of a hat, because there's just no way, no matter how you parse the stuff, no matter how you define things, no clear and consistent way of coming to the same number week over week. They just must be pulling it out of a hat at this point. All right. Wow. Well, let's see. Something else to keep track of. I am not certain how relevant this is going to be going forward. But in light of the continuing work on the January 6th committee, I thought it might serve us to read this piece from the Lancaster Online site, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The meeting here reported seems, it's tangential to January 6th, it seems, but in a new and interesting way. Militia and so-called patriots met, apparently, in Lancaster County 3 days before the January 6th Capitol attack, and here's a look at why, reports Carter Walker, staff writer for the, what's the name of the actual paper here? LNP. Lancaster. We only see it as Lancaster Online. And I don't remember the name of the actual paper there, but perhaps we'll be reminded, or one of you knows. And we could look it up on Wikipedia. But the more important thing, I think, here is the story. And it looks like a kind of a lonely place that they picked to meet, the Hoffman Building at the Solanco Fairgrounds. Is where they chose for this important strategic meeting. They wanted to be very tactical. So, on a cold January day last year, more than 24 people gathered inside a meeting hall in the Solanco Fairgrounds in Quarryville, a wide-open room that typically hosts the local fire company's Christmas Bazaar and the annual Fall Fair's baked goods contest, like more wholesome activities than insurrection. On this particular Sunday afternoon, January 3rd, 2021, the topic was darker and much more urgent. Members of so-called patriot and militia groups from across Pennsylvania and New Jersey strategized about how they would communicate with each other in the event of a major catastrophe. The failure of the electrical grid, an epic natural disaster, an armed clash with their own government. Like, one of those things might happen in the next 3 days. Many in the room believed the collapse of American society was inevitable and that the American political process was broken. The meeting, described in detail for the first time by two participants, plays a central role in the federal government's prosecution of a New Jersey man, James Breheny, I don't know how he pronounces that, Breheny, who attended that meeting and was caught on video storming the U.S. Capitol 3 days later, during the armed insurrection of January 6th, 2021. The new details, obtained through months of reporting, provide the clearest picture to date of the mysterious January 3rd gathering in southern Lancaster County, which has been the subject of intense speculation since it was first disclosed in a federal criminal complaint related to the insurrection. While the participants who spoke to LNP/Lancaster Online said the Quarryville meeting's objectives were broad and focused on communications tactics. The group talked about the best handheld satellite radios and amateur radio bands to use in an emergency. They also acknowledged that some, including Breheny, spoke of traveling to the nation's capital to attend then-President Donald Trump's planned Stop the Steal rally. I know I heard one or two people were interested in coordinating January 6th communications, said one of the participants. He said Breheny and others asked questions about specific communications plans for January 6th after a slideshow presentation on communications techniques. So they were thinking, I guess, more broadly, but some of the attendants at the meeting said, what about 3 days from now when we attack the government? What about communications then? That whole meeting had nothing to do with January 6th. It could have fed into it, but that wasn't the purpose, these participants said. Yet, these guys bring this up. Interesting. He confirmed the time, location, and other details of the Quarryville meeting on the condition that he not be identified because he didn't want to be targeted by others in attendance that day. Lancaster Online granted him anonymity because the details he provided could not otherwise be obtained. A reporter independently corroborated many of the details with the Solanco Fairgrounds staff and a second participant. In addition, top state Oath Keepers officials told LNP/Lancaster Online that he has evidence the participants in the Quarryville meeting were sharing a list that day of supplies to carry to Washington on January 6th. This list included cargo vans, survival kits, and medical supplies, he said. LNP Lancaster Online was not able to determine whether the others who attended the Quarryville meeting joined Breheny in traveling to Washington, D.C. 3 days later. The participants who spoke about the January 3rd meeting said they did not go to the nation's capital on January 6th. Regardless of the Quarryville meeting's stated objective, it is clear that at least some of the participants inside the Solanco Fairgrounds Hoffman building were preparing for events similar to those that would take place 3 days later. That's the interesting part. So even the people who said, well, this has nothing to do with January 6th, were preparing for something like it. In addition to the possibility of natural disaster, the possibility of conflict with the government. A slideshow presentation obtained by the paper in recent weeks instructed the group on the tactics of the fourth and fifth generation warfare. Not 5G, but I guess that's what it stands for. What is fourth and fifth generation warfare? In part, a resistance force to a larger, well-equipped military force needs to be light and agile. We are likely not going to be able to compete with money, technology, and numbers of troops. The slideshow did not refer to plans for January 6th, but federal law enforcement officials allege Breheny, an Oath Keeper, described the Quarryville gathering as a crucial planning session for Trump's rally in Washington, D.C. So despite everyone else saying it had nothing to do with it, he says it did. That's the problem for them. This will be the day when we get our comms on point with multiple other patriot groups, share rally points, etc. This one is important, and I believe this is our last chance to organize before the show. Breheny wrote to Oath Keeper leader Stuart Rhodes, who of course is facing his own indictment, according to federal charging documents. This meeting will be for leaders only. He's making himself sound important there. Rhodes did not attend the Quarryville meeting. Les Mann, or Mahan, M-A-H-A-N, usually I see pronounced man. Les Mann, that's a terrible name. Anyway, a Chester County resident who rented the Solanco Fairgrounds building for the meeting said most attendees were interested in prepping for natural disasters or societal collapse. What a fun way to spend your weekend. And that radio communications is a vital component of those plans. He said that after a slideshow presentation, as people prepared to leave, one attendee stood up and asked that anyone planning to go to Washington, D.C. on January 6th share their phone numbers. That's a communication plan. Mann said that about half a dozen people did so. I don't think many people from the meeting went to D.C. because I don't think many people were interested, he said. It's unfortunate that one guy who attended the meeting did something stupid. Oh well. Literally out of everyone, there was only one guy who got arrested at the Capitol. Okay, but an important guy apparently. Man who lives about 19 miles southeast of Quarryville in Oxford, Chester County, described himself as a prepper, but said he's not a member of a militia. He said planning for the Quarryville meeting began in mid-December, prior to when he saw a January 1st tweet by Trump inviting supporters to the Capitol. But he did see it. There was also a lot of info out there in 2020 about election fraud and martial law. And of course, it was nonsense, but there were a lot of guys who were talking about getting food to prepare for such a breakdown, he said. That was a lot of the conversation at the meeting, being worried about martial law. No matter who declared it, I guess. He added that similar meetings where communications and disaster preparations are held frequently, including recently in Oxford, and that they're open to anyone who wants to come. Brainey's attorney, Harley Bright, of Paterson, New Jersey, similarly denied the objective of the Quarryville meeting was to plan for an assault on the U.S. Capitol. The meeting had nothing to do with January 6th, he says. My client is an expert in communications, ham radio, that type of thing. And what my client was trying to do was to help secure communications lines in case of some natural emergency or some power failure. Brate said that his client was asked to attend the Quarryville meeting by Northern New Jersey Oath Keepers Director Edward Durfee, Jr. Durfee declined to comment when contacted by Lancaster Online. Brate said his client asked other attendees in the Quarryville meeting if they were going to D.C. 3 days later, but said his client did not discuss how the different groups would communicate that day. Brainey was indicted in May by the FBI on a charge of illegally entering the U.S. Capitol and impeding an official proceeding. The mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol tried, of course, to stop the routine ceremonial certification of the election results, yada, yada. Quarryville borough officials claimed that the January 3rd meeting took place at the Solanco Fairgrounds. Clark Behringer, Quarryville's police chief at the time, is he no longer, said one of his officers noticed a large group meeting at the Hoffman building that day, and he added it's not unusual for fairgrounds buildings to be used by outside groups. Behringer now is a magisterial district judge, and said the FBI called him in the spring to ask about the meeting. He said he referred the FBI to a borough manager, Scott Pfeiffer, who also serves as the general manager of the Fair Association. They both said they weren't aware of the exact nature of the meeting, and they don't typically ask. They just get a calendar. He told the FBI the group paid cash. The building cost between $350 and $475 to rent. FBI declined to comment. A leader in Pennsylvania's Oath Keepers organization, who said he did not attend the Quarryville meeting, told Lancaster Online that he saw evidence that participants did, in fact, talk about how to prepare for potential violence in Washington, D.C. 3 days later. Interesting. Didn't attend, but saw evidence that went on. Hans Garrison, H-O-N-S, Hans Garrison, who was serving as the Pennsylvania Oath Keepers state membership director at the time, and until December was the group's president, said he was shown a photograph of meeting notes listing bulleted items needed for January 6th, including the cargo vans, walking sticks that they were probably going to hit people with, survival kits, vehicles, and e-packs, or emergency kits for medical emergencies. Garrison would not provide the photo, though, to the paper. What I heard was it was a planning meeting for January 6th, where we were going to be and where we're going to stay and where we're going to meet up if we get split up, Garrison said. The Lancaster Online could not independently verify his account. Two attendees who spoke with the paper on January 6th said January 6th was only mentioned in passing. Garrison, I wonder why he would say it was more than that. Garrison said his members were not in attendance, and court records show no one publicly associated with the Pennsylvania Oath Keepers has been arrested in connection to the January 6th riots. The House Select Committee to investigate January 6th recently subpoenaed the leaders of the National Oath Keepers organization. We know about that. And a new round, by the way, of higher level subpoenas out in the last day or so, looping in Rudy Giuliani, possibly, I see Roger Stone among them as well. Sidney Powell, a couple other of the top nuts in the Republican tree there. Anyway, to conclude here, a spokesperson for the committee didn't respond to a request for comment. The committee is planning to begin holding more public hearings this year with the hopes of producing a report by summer. So, okay. I mean, it didn't pan out into anything groundbreaking here, but I just thought it was interesting that the investigation, I guess, spanning a much larger portion of the landscape than I thought, if they're already down to the level where they're finding out about meetings at remote fairgrounds in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. But okay, something to watch, I guess, and we'll see whether it develops into anything else more sinister sounding later on. Let's see. Other items that we can share with you here. Let's see. All right, well, no, that one's off topic here. But staying on the January 6th thing, I think. Just a few of the other items in the broad range of reporting and opinionating on the subject. This one I grabbed from, I guess, just, I don't even know. This doesn't seem like it's worth circling back to at this point. Although, I don't know. Well, it might be an interesting framing exercise. I just have here, for whatever reason, still marked for reading Dan Bowles and his piece here for the Washington Post. Is that right? Bowles, how he pronounces it, B-A-L-Z. His January 6th anniversary piece, asking, I think, the obvious question, but I thought it might be worthwhile to go through his rhetoric on it. A year after January 6th, are the guardrails that protect democracy real or illusory? An interesting question. And, well, I thought I would... Oh, you know what? As a matter of fact, before I even jump into it, just checking up on what's happening in the Twitter feed here, Bruce McFarland bringing me this interesting bit of news from Zachary Petrizzo. His tweet saying, Roger Stone said yesterday on InfoWars that he caught COVID-19 recently. I didn't even know that was the case, which has left him with all of the worst symptoms. Well, there are a couple extra symptoms that are particularly bad that I wouldn't mind seeing Roger Stone come down with, but I haven't heard anywhere else any reports of his being in ill health, but we can always hope that it's the case, and whatever all the worst symptoms are. Bruce joking here, COVID is not sending our people its best symptoms, right? They're sending all the worst symptoms. Anyway, that'd be good news if Roger Stone gets taken out by any method. Let me see what the piece I just started here, though, has to say that we can use to fill out our last couple of minutes here on the show today. The January 6th assault on the Capitol, shocking as it was, might have seemed at the time like a last desperate and ultimately unsuccessful attempt by loyalists to Trump to disrupt the certification of Biden's election win. Instead, it marked the blossoming of a Republican Party with a majority that remains in denial about what happened in the 2020 election and aspects of what took place at the Capitol that day. On the anniversary of an event that shook the country and ushered in a year of new threats to democracy, questions about the strength of the electoral system have rarely been more urgent. Though debate and discord have long been part of the American experience, the Founding Fathers probably did not anticipate the conditions that exist today, a major political party in which most followers embrace falsehoods and some traffic in conspiracy theories, a former president unrelenting in his efforts to sow division and spread misinformation, and a largely broken Congress that struggles to function collectively to protect democracy or lacks the will to do so. A century and a half ago, the bitter debate over slavery ultimately brought on the Civil War, the outcome of which prevented the United States from splitting apart, North and South. Today, concerns about the future have become so acute that 3 retired generals warned in a recent Washington Post op-ed that the country could be heading toward another insurrection after the 2024 election and possible military breakdown that could lead to civil war. They're not alone in their fears. Through much of the country's history, despite some rancorous debate, those on opposing sides generally found common ground and shared values and a commitment to making the American experiment a success. Today, because of the fracturing of information sources, a toxic social media environment, and increased hostility between opposing sides, those bonds have been weakened to the point of near breaking. It leaves open some questions. Who or what protects democracy from crumbling, other than the communal belief in its value and the goodwill of citizens on whatever side of the political divide they live to protect it? There are guardrails: the presidency, Congress, Justice Department, Supreme Court, lower courts, local officials, citizens themselves, that are capable and prepared Are they, though? Are they capable and prepared if the need is there? These questions at the start of this year remain unanswered. Nothing new here, so far as I can tell, but well put. Alan Abramowitz, an Emory University political scientist, noted that in 2020, democracy's guardrails held. Courts repeatedly rejected the false claims and pleas from Trump and his allies to overturn the election results. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger resisted direct hectoring from Trump to change certified and recounted results. Congress completed the certification of the Electoral College results in the early morning hours after the assault on the Capitol. All true, and Abramowitz does go on to say he's not confident that things would play out the same way in the future, and with good reason. I think there's growing concern that the next time we see an attempt by a defeated candidate to overturn the results of a fair and free election, it may have a much greater chance of success because of widespread support from leaders and voters from the defeated candidate's party and possibly even from the courts and elections officials, he said in an email exchange. We know all about that, of course, and we've been talking about the possibility. In fact, the determination in the Republican Party to make sure that that is the case. So again, nothing new here, but I guess I would remind everybody one more time that, the guardrails, if they held at all, they barely held. And it's entirely possible that the guardrails may become the instruments of the destruction itself next time. I saw Dave Weigel just yesterday posing the poignant question, what happens if there is another insurrection, or even if just this insurrection is finally prosecuted, but in 2024 we elect a president inclined to pardon all of those people, or to pardon people who might engage in a new insurrection, depending. But where does that leave us? Is the presidency really a guardrail? Is Raffensperger really a guardrail? If the law were different, I still feel like he might have been tempted to give Trump what he wanted. He was just worried about legal trouble. Take that away, and he might deliver that. And of course, as far as the insurrection went, did democracy win just because the insurgents decided to go home?
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David.
Well, obviously, I don't think so. But at any rate, one thing I can do for you today, despite the fact that we distracted ourselves with what might have been Picayune concerns about what was going on in Lancaster County, Justice won't be here with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy to round things up. We hope he'll be feeling better and back on his feet. It's not COVID tomorrow, but in the meantime, we'll see you tomorrow.